Good evening, and thank you all for coming to this information session tonight. Just setting a little context, my name is Mike Jordan. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the city, and I'm the chief sponsor of the Transition Project. I think probably most of you know that the project has multiple components based on the charter amendment was passed last November. Many of those components have gotten quite a bit of media lately, and they're being managed by the team on the transition. All the things from a districting commission putting forward new districts to a salary commission setting salaries for elected officials, working with Multnomah County to set up the ranked choice voting for the ballot next November, or excuse me, in November of 24. But tonight, we are going to focus on the city organization and future improvements. I think many of you know that the ballot measure mandated that the mayor will become the executive of the city, but the mayor is also charged with hiring the first city administrator for the city. And all city employees other than the chief of police and the city attorney, which will also be appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council, along with the city administrator, all other city employees will report to that city administrator. And so a part of this project, which you'll see some in more detail tonight with some slides that we have to present, is really about trying to set up an organization so that the new city administrator has the very best chance of being able to manage what is a very large city with lots of different lines of business and be able to be held accountable reasonably for the performance of that organization. So tonight, Jamie Duhamel and Jennifer Chang will present some slides and information about this part of the transition and a part that we're calling future improvements. We won't be able to change everything about the city that maybe needs to be changed in the first phase with the organizational changes, but we will be working on a number of things that we believe could be future improvements that a future city administrator, future mayor might want to work on when they take office in 2025. One thing I want to kind of make clear, while we are looking at org changes to the city, we are very well aware that drawing a new organizational chart does not necessarily change the culture of a big organization like the City of Portland. We will do our best to set up the organization so that a future city administrator can be successful, but ultimately it will take time to change the culture of the city and the way we behave and the way we collaborate with each other and the way we serve the residents of Portland. So know that while we are doing our best in this interim time between now and January 2025, the changes in the city will go on for many years into the future. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Jamie and get started with the information. Jamie?
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the introduction, Mike. My colleague Jennifer and I are looking forward to sharing with you what the charter transition team has been working on to help the city prepare for this new form of government. You'll also meet a couple other team members, Nicole and Becky, who are going to help answer some of your questions. But before we get into it, we want to make sure everyone can fully participate. So we're going to go over some Zoom logistics and the agenda before diving into the work. Next slide, please. So this is an online meeting and the meeting is being recorded for later viewing. A copy of this recording will be posted on the city's transition webpage under past meeting and events. We have closed captioning available tonight, and to access it, please click on the CC button on the bottom right side of your screen. Also, while today's session is for informational purposes only, we will be taking time to answer some clarifying questions. So the Zoom Q&A feature is available for your questions, and some may be answered by staff right away in the chat, but some questions we may answer live during the Q&A. If you see a clarifying question that you would like to see answered, please upvote it with a thumbs up in the chat, and that will signal to us that multiple people have similar questions. We may not be able to answer all the questions tonight, but they will become part of the meeting record. Next slide, please. So tonight's agenda has us together for about an hour and a half. We're going to start with an overview of the two projects called City Organization and Future Improvements, followed by the results of a community outcomes report that we put together to help inform those two projects. We'll spend about 20 minutes answering some of your clarifying questions about what we shared with you. And then we'll turn it over to Jennifer to take a deeper dive in the City Organization project, when she will share some structure examples and describe the equity tool that we'll be using in our decision making. And then we will follow that with some additional Q&A to make sure that all of your questions are answered. And then we'll wrap up our evening with some information about how you can stay involved as the work continues to move forward. Next slide, please. So today, while we are focusing on the two projects called City Organization and Future Improvements, both of those projects are part of a much larger and extensive body of ongoing work of the transition team to implement the charter reforms approved by Portland voters in November 2022. So the team has 4 major tasks, and this set of infographics show where we are today and where we're headed. First, we are moving towards a new voting system called ranked choice voting. Work is already underway with the county and city to formally implement new election rules and systems to be ready when Portlanders cast their ballot in the November 2024 election. Very soon, you will start to see a lot more information and education about the new system and what you can expect as a voter to prepare you. The November 2024 election is when you will be choosing a whole new set of elected officials for the new form of government. Second, the community voted for councilors to represent 4 geographic districts instead of being elected citywide. With 3 city council members elected from each district, the city council is going to expand to a total of 12 members. So the team is facilitating the Independent District Commission, which is a public body of community members who are authorized to establish these districts. This body just wrapped up a large and extensive outreach and engagement effort, and will be meeting several more times in August to make their final decisions. You should also be hearing about that soon. And third, the team is working to define the roles of the 12 city councilors, which are focused on setting policy and engaging with community. And you're going to hear a lot more about this work in August. A lot of stuff happening at the same time. And finally, we're working on transitioning day-to-day oversight of bureaus to a mayor elected citywide and bringing on a professional city administrator tasked with managing all city services. And that leads us back to the purpose of this information session and what we want to share with you today. You can learn more about all of this work and sign up to get regular updates by visiting our website at portland.gov/transition. Next slide, please. So transitioning away from the commission form of government allows for a whole city approach to systems and problem solving. Our 26 bureaus and offices will need to pull in one direction under the leadership of a city administrator that reports to the mayor. City Organization and Future Improvements are the names of 2 separate but connected projects that we are leading to help the city move towards that whole city approach. We want our city's leadership, our new leadership and bureaus to be set up for success. So this includes operating effectively and equitably in delivering services to Portland residents and communities. The City Organization Project is focused on developing a functional organizational structure with city bureaus reporting to a city administrator. And the Future Improvements Project is a longer-term project to identify recommendations to how the government can deliver services more effectively to Portlanders. So let's talk a little bit more about both. Next slide, please. Michael Jordan, our Chief Administrative Officer, whom you just met, is authorized by Portland City Council to create a recommended structure that he will bring to City Council for approval in October. And to arrive at an effective and equitable recommendation, Mike is collaborating with Bureau leadership, City Council offices, and other city leadership with subject matter expertise in many areas, including communications and equity and others. And this collaboration is organized into 5 programmatic assessment teams, each of whom represent the current service areas the city operates under. The assessment teams are working very intentionally to evaluate the current structure, identify the range of options that may solve for some of the key challenges within the current structure, and incorporating input from employees and community to inform priorities and options. What I'll be sharing with you very shortly is the community input that we gathered that will help inform the project. But first, I want to tell you a bit more about the Future Improvements Project. So next slide, please. The Future Improvement Project is really all about the ways in which the city needs to improve that can't be fixed by a structure change. And I'm sure everyone listening has several examples in mind about how the city could improve the way it delivers services to community or responds to community needs, or even how it includes community voices. Changing how the city is structured mostly just creates a foundation that allows for the longer term work of improving services to begin. So beginning after October, our attention will turn toward assessing the needs, ideas, and potential timing of a variety of systems and service improvement recommendations that the future government may choose to shepherd forward. This project will include more direct engagement with community because this is the part of the work that most impacts your day-to-day relationship with the city. So while today's session is focusing on informing you mostly about city organization, just know that you will have more opportunities, probably starting this fall, but definitely over the next year, to let us know what you think and what you would like to see the city focus on. In the meantime, however, we really wanted to provide city leadership with an understanding of what you as a community have already been telling the city about what you would like to see and what they should be focusing on. So we created the Community Outcomes Report to reflect the input the city has already received from community for a number of years, so that city leadership had some information that could be used for decisions that are being made now. And I'd like to share with you what we learned. Next slide, please. The Community Outcomes Report was released to the public on July 7th and can be found on our website at portland.gov/transition/documents. To be very clear, it is an informal analysis of a limited set of sources. It is not an exact measurement of community input, although it does rely on sources that used national best practices and data science. Ultimately, it is just a high-level summary of those sources and is intended to be used as a helpful resource to inform the city organization and future improvements projects. It will be used solely for development of future community engagement opportunities and internal analysis. The report provides a lot more detail than I have time to go into tonight, but I will give you the high-level takeaways and explain how and where we got the information that shaped the report. But I encourage you all to read it if you're interested in more details. We reviewed several sources that have collected community input in a variety of ways. These sources include city audits of bureaus and programs from 2020 to 2023, recommendations from the City Ombudsman's Office from 2017 to 2023, public comment that was received by the Portland Charter Commission that happened from 2020 to 2022, and then finally citywide community surveys, including the Portland Insight Survey and the Portland Engagement Project. And those surveys were conducted in 2022 and 2023. And collectively, these sources represent over 5,000 Portlanders from a diverse range of populations and Portland geographies. So when we read through this large collection of input, we identified the common themes that rose to the top over and over again. What you see on the screen are the high-level goals that were identified in all of these sources. Clearly, these aren't new ideas. We're not breaking new ground here. However, we took it a step further and identified some specific outcomes under each of these goals that also came up from community over and over again across the different sources. In other words, for the city to demonstrate that it had achieved these goals, what might be some of the outcomes that would measure success? What might it look like if the city were coordinated, accountable, accessible, responsive, and equitable? So let's look at these one at a time. Next slide, please. Based on community input, we defined a city that is coordinated as one that operates under one vision for Portland's future that creates benefit for all. And if the city were to be coordinated, here are some potential outcomes that community has indicated they would like to see. Maybe budgets are unified and resources are distributed based on how they support shared goals and values. Perhaps infrastructure projects like sewer and street repair work in the same location at the same time and in a way that is predictable to the public. And maybe goals, plans, resolutions, and policies that have citywide impacts would be aligned and brought under standardized management. All of these outcomes are informative to the future improvements projects. But in addition, the third objective about standardizing management of goals, plans, and resolutions may have implications for the city organization project as well. Next slide, please. So based on community input, we defined a city that is accountable as one that makes progress on goals and values and clearly communicates every step of the way. And if the city were to be more accountable, here are some potential outcomes that community has indicated they would like to see. So maybe performance measures for citywide goals would be created and progress would be easy for the public to find and track. Perhaps the public can see a clear connection between the taxes and bonds that they pay and the resulting services and outcomes. And maybe new public-led processes that are more inclusive and representative help make decisions for implementation of city policies. All of these outcomes are, of course, informative to the future improvements projects, although we do not see any of them being addressed through the city organization project directly. Next slide, please. Again, based on community input, we defined a city that is accessible as one that improves how Portlanders connect to government services. And if the city were to be more accessible, here are some potential outcomes that community has indicated they would like to see. Perhaps there would be a modernized website that provides reliable, interactive, and multilingual information about services that are available. Maybe it is easier to find a point of contact for a bureau or a service-related question. And perhaps permitting programs are easy to understand and quick to navigate. All of these outcomes, again, are informative to the future improvements project, although we do not see any of them being directly addressed through the city organization project. Although having a clearer structure will make it much easier to work on communicating who you can contact at the city. Next slide, please. Again, based on community input, we defined a city that is responsive as one that centralizes leadership efforts to effectively focus on solutions to social, economic, and public health challenges to improve quality of life and well-being for Portlanders. And if the city were to be more responsive, here are some potential outcomes that community has indicated they would like to see. Maybe standardized practices are applied to all public services, but service areas are allowed flexibility to specialize and meet community needs. Perhaps hygiene issues like trash and bathroom facilities are addressed quickly and equitably in all neighborhoods. And maybe city departments are aligned on solutions and have the authority to make decisions directly with jurisdictional partners. All of these outcomes, again, are informative to the future improvements projects. But in this case, we also see the objectives around standardized practices that allow flexibility in service areas and city department alignment on solutions as being informational to the city organization project. Next slide, please. So finally, based on community input, we defined a city that is equitable as one that prioritizes solutions and services for people who experience the most disproportionate impacts of social, economic, and public health challenges. And if the city were to be more equitable, here are some potential outcomes that community has indicated they would like to see. Perhaps enforcement actions by the city are less complaint-driven and are standardized to reduce their disproportionate impact on vulnerable Portlanders. Maybe taxes, fines, and fee collections are standardized and brought under unified management. And maybe city funding for services that address affordability and community safety are prioritized to meet the needs of communities who face disproportionate impacts. All of these outcomes, again, are informative to the future improvements projects, of course, but we also see the objectives around unified management for taxes, fees, and collections as having alignment with the city organization project as well. Okay, that is a broad overview of the community outcomes report. We are going to pause here to spend about 15-20 minutes answering any questions that you might have. And then after Q&A, Jennifer is going to explain more about the city organization project, including descriptions of what organizational structures look like. And then she's going to tie all of this information together with an explanation of the equity assessment tool we're developing that incorporates this information and more into the decision-making process. So I'm now going to hand it over to Nicole now to help moderate the Q&A. Nicole?
We've got some, welcome everyone. We've got some great questions already queued up, though some of them are more about structure, and I might be saving those ones for the next, the next set of Q&A, because that one focuses a bit more on structure. But we have a question from Carol here about, is there a job description for the city administrator? And can someone talk through what that sort of process looks like of bringing on a city administrator in this work as we transition to this new form of government?
So should I jump in here, Nicole? Maybe.
Yeah, take it away.
Okay. Well, a job description has not been completed yet, but we have been interacting with both the International City and County Managers Association and with the National League of Cities, and with a number of cities who've gone through these kinds of changes and have city administrator type positions for several months now, and we'll continue to do that. And there will be an official job description, because we need to do that to be able to classify the job within the human resources system, be able to assign it a pay range, those kinds of things. But ultimately, that description will be really important to lay the groundwork for a new city council and a new mayor to have a discussion about what kind of characteristics would a successful candidate have in their view as they go through the hiring process early in 2025 for that first city administrator that the mayor needs to appoint. And remember, the council needs to confirm that appointment. So that will kind of be the process going forward. There'll be an official job description, but ultimately that will be the basis for determining what kind of set of experiences and capabilities are you looking for in that first city administrator.
Thank you, Michael. Moving to around the goals and outcomes that Jamie just reviewed for that we came up with in the outcomes report. Pardon me, moving through multiple parts of my screen for a moment. How are we changing some of those goals and outcomes and making them more definitive throughout this work that we're leading, from all of the information that we've gathered, from all of the surveys and all of the different ways that Portlanders can currently communicate with different bureaus and different types of outreach?
Happy to jump in, Mike, or you can take a stab.
No, go ahead, Becky.
So this was the question from Pamela. You keep using the word maybe. How do they turn into something more definitive? It's a good question. And I think that Jamie was doing a good job of not promising that all of the challenges that we face as a city are going to be addressed by this project. Obviously, the city is facing lots of challenges. Every city does. And we have this funny dynamic of this project is preparing our city organization for the future form of government. And we are currently operating the city. There's 7,000 people that work at the city, and we're moving priorities forward all the time. And there are opportunities for engagement with community across the city. There's expression of leadership from city council, from the people that are in charge of the bureaus currently. So there's a lot of, policy that's being moved forward. There's a lot of process improvements that are happening. What we're trying to do in this project, as Jamie articulated, the first part is set up a city administrator for success. So build them an organizational structure that's manageable by one person instead of by 5. Because right now we're managed by the 5 city councilors. And then the second piece is really this opportunity for us to have those more robust conversations about what can we do in the scope of the transition project to help improve some of the things that are challenges for the city. So as Jamie said, that's going to involve a lot of conversation with community to help us articulate what those key challenges are. This community outcomes report was a sort of a survey of surveys, right? So an analysis of what we already have heard that will help inform the conversations that we have in that future improvements project. So I understand that there was a lot of maybes and there was a lot of this would be nice to solve this would be nice to solve that. And we will continue operating in this transition project, but also in this city writ large to make policy changes to improve our services. That's happening all the time anyway. And it is a challenge that we negotiate all the time about setting ourselves up for the future and also recognizing the pressing challenges that we're facing today. So hopefully that rumination helped Pamela clarify a little bit where we're going from here.
Okay, moving to the next question. There's some anxiety around all of this change and what will happen to the neighborhood association system throughout this transition.
Well, maybe I'll jump in. There are currently no thoughts about dramatic change to the neighborhood association system during this interim transition. I cannot speak for what a future council and what a future mayor would want to do regarding the neighborhood association system, but I can tell you at this current time, there aren't any contemplations of changing that system with the transition project.
Okay. Done that. Okay. Going back to the job description about the city manager, is the community going to be able to suggest qualities and talents that the city manager should have?
Well, the hiring and the confirmation of a new city administrator under the new form of government will be up to the first mayor that's elected in 2024 under the new system and the new city council that's elected in that same election. I will say when I have been involved in these before, there has been a public outreach for those kinds of characteristics that the public is looking for in a city administrator. And I would imagine, since this is going to be the very first one that the city of Portland has ever had, I think it would be important for there to be an opportunity for the public to weigh in on what their expectations are of that first city administrator.
Yeah, and thank you, Michael. We're using a city administrator system and not a city manager system. There's subtle but clear differences between those two systems.
Correct.
Let's see. Talking through, and this moves a little bit further into our next section. So apologies if I'm jumping slides, Jennifer. In terms of, oh goodness, Lucy, I lost my thing. council has to create a future city structure? What flexibility under the city administrator system will the city council, do we think, has in sort of changing the structure of the city? Or is it more the city administrator and the mayor in this new system that works towards that?
Well, in a perfect world, the new mayor and the new council will work together on those kinds of things. But I believe under our current system and the current charter, the city council has the authority to create bureaus, which is what the city calls its departments and offices. And so as we look to change the organizational structure in preparation for the new mayor and council in January of 2025, under the current charter language, we have to work with the current council to do that if we're going to do it in advance of January of 2025. So that's the authority that the current council has over the current city structure. So what I'll be doing over the next few months is gathering all of the information from the groups that are working in the service areas, the leadership of bureaus, the current commissioners, the input that we can get from the public and from our own employees, and trying to synthesize that into a set of recommendations, which will go to the current council in October of this year. And if we can get them to approve those, which I think they will, then we will begin implementation of that new structure and getting it as let's say, as implemented as we can for a new council that will show up in January of 25, and the new mayor, of course. And in between that time, what is driving that October timeframe for the new structure to be adopted is that we will need to begin to prepare a budget for the 24-25 fiscal year, which starts at July 1st of 24. We will begin to prepare for that into the new structure. So that's the reason we need to understand what that structure is this fall, so that we can budget into it for the next fiscal year, which, oh, by the way, in the middle of, we will hand that structure and that budget over to that new mayor in January of 25, which will be in the middle of a fiscal year. And that new mayor will be the executive to manage that budget and that new organizational structure, and hire city administrator. And the new council and mayor will need to begin preparing for the next budget cycle, which starts July 1st of 25. So they'll be very busy in that first half of 2025.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm noticing a lot of questions have to do with structure, and I know that we're going to be talking about that and the equity lens in this next section. So I'm going to do a quick scan for other questions having to do really quickly with this last section for a moment. Apologies, I have too many screens open yet again on my laptop, on my computer. Okay, so many of the questions have to do with structure, and so I want to move on to the next section. It has to do with a little bit more about just some of this, and talk through our equity lens. And so we'll end this section of the Q&A and work to continue to answer questions that I'm seeing here. And so I'm going to move to the next slide.
Thank you, Nicole, Michael, and Becky, and Jamie for helping to respond to those questions and providing that overview. So I wanted to just share and recap what Jamie was mentioning earlier, that As we go through this immense time of transition, our goal is really to support our city's new leadership and bureaus to be set up for success. And this means and includes operating effectively and equitably in delivering services to Portland communities. And as we shared at the beginning of the presentation, city organization is one of the projects of two we're describing, and city organization is a project specifically to produce a functional organizational structure for Portland's new form of government, which is a mayor council form with city bureaus reporting to a single city administrator. So we wanted to start by sharing what our current structure is so that we can talk through some of the key different aspects and characteristics of our current structure and how it will change as we move to our new form, and why the structure itself will need to change to accommodate it as well. So this picture shows a graphic that represents our current structure, which is a commission form of government. And in the commission form, the mayor and commissioners have the dual roles of setting both policies, and they also directly oversee management of bureaus, city bureaus. In Portland, we have a mayor and 4 city commissioners, and each hold and oversee a portfolio of bureaus. For example, looking in the center here, the mayor, Mayor Ted Wheeler, has a portfolio of 7 different bureaus and offices under him. And these include the Portland Police Bureau and the Office of Government Relations. Currently, the directors of these bureaus and offices report directly to the mayor, or in the cases of the other offices under the other commissioners, those bureaus report directly to that commissioner. The act of developing and setting policy and operating bureaus can sometimes be more siloed in this type of government, since it occurs across individual offices who each have their own priorities and processes for operating. As we transition away from the commission form, it provides the opportunity to take a whole city approach to systems thinking and also problem solving. The roles of the mayor and city council will change, and having a shared understanding of these changes will help us to support operations and have a more successful transition as we move to our new form of government. Next slide, please. So what will be different under the council mayor structure? There are definitely key elements of this form of government, which I'd like to highlight. First is that the district-based city councilors will no longer directly oversee city bureaus. Council will work together to help set policies, and also that work will be to achieve and reach the goal of achieving desired community outcomes and priorities identified through communities. The citywide elected mayor will no longer serve on council. And in many cases, the mayor is often a full-time and paid staff position with significant administrative and budgetary authority. Next, the future mayor will appoint and the council will confirm a professional city administrator. We talked a little earlier about this important role. And the mayor and the city administrator will work together to implement the laws and policies developed by council and also manage the city bureaus. Structurally, all 26 city bureaus and programs will be under the oversight of the city administrator. So this is a very large task, right? Changing the structure of a government. And we are researching best practices in peer cities and also talking to subject matter experts internally within our city and externally across other cities and across the country to determine the different options and recommendations that can really help set us up for success and as we're moving through this transition. Next slide, please. We wanted to provide an example of an organizational structure in a mayor council form of government. And just to note, this is a very simplified version, but it is meant to really highlight the key aspects here. The mayor and the council, as you can see, our city council are separate, and the city administrator is reporting to the mayor, but also approved through city council. And there can be many different organizational structures, as many structures as there are cities, because each city has its own unique charter, which lays out how that government's design and organizational structure should be to meet the needs of their residents and community. For example, a mayor can have more or less unilateral authorities where they can act alone. And in some cities like Portland, we will appoint a professional with administrative authority to manage the city organization. In Portland, while not a member of the city council, the mayor has the same authority to introduce legislation as the city council and also serves as the city's chief executive. And as demonstrated in this, this organizational structure, the city administrator will be appointed and report to the mayor, and also, but that person will also be confirmed by council. And together, city administrator and the mayor will manage the day-to-day operations of the city. And that you see on the bottom line, the bureau directors. In this example, there's 4, right? In the city of Portland, we have 26 individual bureaus and offices that each have a director. Next slide, please. Throughout this process, we've been researching, as I mentioned, and exploring best practices and other examples of cities. And in many cities, there can be an additional level or levels to support the government to function effectively. One example is a layer of assistant level positions who report to the city administrator. And in this example, in the city of Sacramento, California, it shows that as the set of squares that are right under, they are 2 levels under the mayor council. And in Sacramento, these positions are called assistant city administrators. They can also be called in other cities, deputy city administrators. And that is our current planning for what will be needed in Portland as we are envisioning and exploring and researching all of these different opportunities. The layer of executive leadership between the city administrator and the bureau directors is having that layer is a common practice in many cities because it allows for a more efficient management of a large city. The deputy administrator roles can often take on the type of responsibilities that free up bureau directors to deliver better services and manage and operate their bureaus more effectively. In our case, we envision that deputies will support the city administrator by ensuring consistent expectations and results across different service areas, and also play a key role in helping to build a healthy and positive and equitable workplace culture to advance our city's core values and goals. Also, the deputy city administrators will help to bridge citywide approaches with the deep expertise that they'll bring and that they will also have embedded in each of the city's different service areas. And as we shared earlier, Mike, as our current chief administrative officer, is leading the development of the recommended structure as it enabling it to report up to the new city administrator role. And his office and our transition team have been collaborating with and working closely with bureau leadership city council offices and other leadership with subject matter expertise, and also including in the areas of communications and equity, to understand all of those important considerations and recommendations, and also the challenges that we really want to solve for as we plan for our new structure. As we move towards developing a recommendation, we are focused on incorporating priorities identified by communities, as shared earlier in Jamie's presentation, and also what we are hearing from city employees. A concrete way in which we're doing this is going to be through using an equity tool that we'll apply in our processing. I'd like to share a little bit about this tool. We are currently working to finalize it by early next week. And it is a tool we'll use specific to the task of forming the recommended structure. And the main purpose of the tool is to ensure that we are aligning important community priorities and characteristics and the city's core values as we are just thinking through and making all of the deliberations and decisions related to what a proposed structure will be. And there are 10 priority characteristics that we've identified through our community outcomes report, through employees' responses, and also through our city's core values. And they're listed here on the slide. And we took these 10 priority characteristics and categorized them into 4 groups based on their similarities and also interconnectedness. And these are the first category of characteristic desired for our city government is to be anti-racist, equitable, and accountable. The next is to be accessible and transparent. The third category is collaborative, coordinated, participatory, and responsive. And the final is fiscally responsible. And our plan with these characteristics, next slide, please, is to use these characteristics, provide a definition to them as reflected earlier in the community outcomes report, and then be able to apply several questions and analysis to the different proposals we're looking at to see how well they align to these key characteristics that are desired in our city government. Next slide, please. So here's one example for the grouping of collaborative, having a city government that is collaborative, coordinated, participatory, and responsive. We're going to look at 4 main areas. First, identifying aspects of a proposed structure that align well to these characteristics. Second is identifying areas of the proposal that would pose limitations to the structure being aligned to these values. And then we'll also have an area where we can provide narrative responses where it can elevate areas of agreement or differences, and then finally provide a assessment of how well the particular proposal is aligned, highly aligned, or not well aligned to these particular characteristics. Next slide, please. So in summary, I'd just like to share the next steps in our timeline specific to the city organization project. First, from April, starting back in April through next month, we are continuing our engagement with leadership, employees, and subject matter experts and evaluating the programmatic assessments that have come from our city bureau staff and departments. And we're going to be compiling all of that and also having additional conversations with city leadership to just provide all the different recommendations and considerations towards a structure, what should be in a proposed structure. Then in August through September, Mike will be leading the effort of developing the proposal based on all of these various considerations and information and that we've been collecting, and also applying the equity tool to during the process. In October, we'll have a recommendation that will be ready to forward to City Council for their consideration. We realize this is a very tight timeline of having this occur in October, and it is driven in large part by the city's budget development process, which Mike referenced and described earlier in the Q&A. We need to have implementable new structure in place by January of 2025. And in order to have that be ready, it does need to be incorporated into the city's next fiscal year budget, which has already begun planning for. And that, again, is partially why the October deadline is important for council to review. Then in November, and then in October, council will review and make a determination and or approval. And then following that time in November, we'll begin implementation and budgeting for the new structure. And following that, from November through January of 2025, we'll continue the work of implementation and transitioning to the new structure. So I know that there was a lot of information. I think we would like to pause again and see what questions there may be, clarifying questions related to the information shared. And we can also reference back to some of those earlier questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Back to host our Q&A. Again, my name is Nicole Forbes. I use she, her. I'm part of this transition staff. I do want to correct one thing because I realized we used an old graphic earlier. I want to correct that Simone Reed is our current city auditor who took office in this past January 2023. So we'll make sure to update that graphic for future presentations. So apologies for that. I'm going to go through many questions and I'm so excited to see them here. So we're going to start off with some a question around the public partnership. That Portland has had a long history of public-private partnerships, from everything to parks to transportation. How will partnerships be proposed, decided, and managed in this new type of organizational structure?
Well, why don't I jump in? I don't really anticipate that all of the kind of drivers behind public-private partnerships would change in the future. However, any kind of formal partnership, whether that's about how revenue is gotten for a service or a public-private partnership in the actual delivery of service to residents. Those have always been approved by City Council in the past. I would expect that to continue to the degree that it involves either the gathering of revenue or the delivery of a service with a public-private partnership. So I don't expect that to change a great deal. And you're absolutely right about Portland being very innovative historically about involving the public and private sectors working together, whether it's the for-profit or the nonprofit private sector.
Thank you, Mike. Going back to the overview that Jennifer just talked about in terms of the calendar and what we expect. When will a tentative draft city organization be available for the public to see, and when we expect that to happen in that calendar process?
Well, the the calendar that we're working with right now is to have what will probably take the form of a resolution before council in October. That I'm hopeful that we will have most of the synthesis done of all the alternatives and all the input we're getting by the end of August. And that will leave September really for us to put together that final proposal that will be able to go to council. So I can't give you an exact date, but sometime between probably mid-September and early October, that proposal will become public as it's proposed to City Council.
Great, thank you. We've talked a lot about different structures of bureaus. Do we have a status update or a timeline at all? And this is slightly off topic, but I'm curious if anyone knows here, if we have a status of infrastructure to accommodate new council offices, or what that could look like as we move from a council of 5 to a council of 12.
Well, that's a great question. As a part of this transition, one of the components is how will we accommodate a larger council for it, one, for offices, and secondly, for a council chamber for them to meet in. We're analyzing multiple alternatives, one of which would be to do remodeling of the current city hall so that the chamber could accommodate 12 councilors, and that the office spaces could be reconfigured so that all 12 could have offices in City Hall. We're also looking at the utilization of the Portland building possibly as one alternative. And then I think the questioner may also be alluding to during the Charter Commission's work, there was discussion of councilors having offices in their districts. And we looked at that early on and determined that there were so many unknowns about how that configuration would work that we decided to wait on that until the new council is actually seated in 2025, and then have a process to work with them about what their expectations are for offices in district. Obviously, there is a cost component to that, along with accommodating a chamber and office space downtown. So we're trying to look not only at what are the upfront costs of making this transition, the one-time costs, but also what would be the ongoing costs of having offices in district versus downtown, or both. And so we put off the district office question until the new council seated in 25.
Great, thank you, Mike. This is a question about the sort of internal process that we're taking. Folks have read that the reorganization project is being analyzed by groups that are currently bureaus. In bureaus and city leadership that we talked about earlier. How is our analysis moving beyond the moment in time division of reporting to maybe a larger space, or moving just beyond that moment of time division, which might not be what folks want, and sort of not what we heard in that community assessment tool?
It's a good question. And I think there are really a couple of answers to it. One is, and it was alluded to in the slides, that we've been looking nationwide at organizational structures and different ways that cities have approached organizing their services within their cities. We've also looked at best practices from, again, National League of Cities and the International City and County Managers Association. The other thing that we've done, and I think this was noted in another question, and that is that bureau assignments prior to this last election had always been handled in a more ad hoc way, with the mayor discussing with individual commissioners what their interests were and assigning bureaus along those lines. We worked with the mayor and the commissioners this time to try to foreshadow what might be at least the framework of a new organizational structure, and asking the mayor to assign bureaus along service area lines. It's not perfect by any stretch, but it is a lot more aligned than we have been in the past. So you will see that one commissioner has most of the community development bureaus, which are planning and Prosper Portland, the Development Services Bureau, and Housing Bureau. And one commissioner has most of the public safety bureaus, so fire and emergency communications and emergency management. And one notable exception, the mayor retained the police bureau, but for the purposes of our conversations around potential restructuring, the police bureau has been participating with the public safety bureaus. You also note that there's a public works group that is assigned to one of the commissioners, which includes the Water Bureau, Bureau of Environmental Services, which handles sanitary, sewer, and stormwater, and then the Portland Bureau of Transportation in one group. So we were hopeful that a realignment, and that alignment, quite frankly, matches up with a fairly significant group of cities out there that align their services along those same lines. And that's how we set up these conversations. We have been asking through the program assessments that these groups have been doing to really take a look not only at what's working well, but what have been the barriers to better service in the past. We've been asking subject matter experts to weigh in. We've asked our employees to weigh in. And we've been attempting to raise questions that we could look at. Now, let me say, and if I get off script here, I apologize a little bit. If someone had asked me back in November of last year, Mike, we'd like you to head up a project to reorganize city government, I would have said, give me 5 years, and I think we can do a pretty good job. We don't have 5 years. We have less than one to do this in, which is pretty fast for an effort like this. And so a lot of what we will be thinking about between now and October will be not only what can we do in restructuring so that a one city administrator can oversee the city rather than the 5 commissioners that do now, but what can we not do that would be is too big a change, is too hard to execute in one fiscal cycle. And we would make a judgment about what we can do well and what we can't do well in one fiscal cycle. And many of those other things that we can't do will go into the future improvements project that you're going to hear a little bit about in a bit here. And we also know that what we're doing is setting up a framework for a new city administrator that we think gives them a chance for appropriate spans of control, appropriate amounts of accountability that would allow them to manage the city when they first show up. We also know that a new council, a new mayor as executive, and a new city administrator will have many ideas about how the city could be organized better to do things, and probably things at a more granular level that we, quite frankly, can't pull off in one fiscal cycle and make it work within all of our systems, whether it's the personnel systems or the budget systems or our accounting systems. And so all those things have to work for a new organizational structure to actually be a working structure. And we have to do all of that and be ready for a 24-25 fiscal cycle where all of that has to work together. So while we can do some things around the large framework of city government, we really cannot do everything that what might actually be a very good idea. And so we will get those into the future improvements project. Sorry for that long-winded explanation, but it is a complicated effort. And one of the biggest judgments will be, what can we do well in one fiscal cycle, and what should be held back for a future council and future mayor to look at.
Mike, does that mean that the October assessment is going to retain all 26 bureaus and not consider structural adjustments or improvements? Or is that structural adjustment more happening in the future improvements conversation that will be starting in the fall into the spring?
It's a good question. And there are really two things going on simultaneously here. One is this overarching work that we're talking about right now. But many of you may know that the current commissioners in charge of these service areas are also looking at the different offices and bureaus within their service areas and are making adjustments to how those are working, and which they have the authority to do under the current charter. So we're looking at all of those things, and it is likely that there will be some changes among some of the offices and potentially some consolidation of some of the offices and bureaus as we move into the new structure.
Great, thank you. Moving sort of into, sorry, I lost so many questions are coming in. So thank you everyone for submitting all of your questions. I'm trying to thread the ones I see themes coming together. So give me a moment here. Okay. Okay, here's the next question. Contracting is an area that seems to cut across all of the bureaus and programs. And not quite sure how the question is not quite sure how we're handling it now, but many of those contracts require council approval, which lends itself to being public and transparent. That may be changing in our when an individual has authority, like a city administrator. How will that look like in this new form of government, or how would we be addressing and making sure that it's still a transparent process?
That's a great question because it goes to the fundamental division between the executive branch to be able to efficiently operate the city, but do so only under the guidance and authority that the council gives, whether that's budget authority or specific ordinances and that they adopt, which direct the management of city government. And so we have a part of our project right now that's examining all of the things that are mandated to go to council, and many of them, you rightfully note, are within the procurement process. It is a highly regulated process right now. And so there is a discussion going on with the city attorney's office and trying to follow the intent of the Charter Commission and the voters that voted in November of last year about this division between the legislative branch and the executive branch and which authorities belong where. And at a very high level, the executive will have broad authority to manage the city, and whether that's procurement processes or HR processes, technology and how it's deployed across the city. The executive will have broad authority to make decisions about those things, but only within the budget authority that person has been given by the council. So year to year authority to appropriate funds, or specific authority that the council has either kept to themselves through ordinance or has explicitly given to the executive through ordinance. So, having had some experience with this before in other governments, the council over time will watch the executive and decide what things that the executive has to bring to council before they can do. And that will change over time. And that relationship between the executive and legislative branches will evolve as both branches work with each other to manage the city in the future.
Apologies, I was coughing and I had unmuted myself and started talking. Thank you. I am curious. Mike, I think you've sort of already touched on this around future improvements phase. I'm not sure if anyone else can touch a little bit more, if we have more information on what the future improvements conversation might look like. And I know you've already said it was a super short timeline in terms of the dialogue for this fiscal current process. If there's anything else you'd like to add to that in terms of challenges, though I think you've already covered that. Someone could speak to sort of what that future improvement conversations looked like.
Yeah, Becky should maybe jump in on the future improvements part.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Nicole. So I'll keep it pretty brief, but the future improvements, as we said in the presentation earlier, is an opportunity to think beyond the high level structural change about ways that we can make our service delivery to Portlanders better. And Mike talked about sort of the limitations that we have that stem largely from implementability on the city organization project. So we're looking at the program level and higher program as defined in the budget by the program offer. So it does limit the amount of structural change that we can accomplish during this project. So future improvements is to me, it's a real widening of the scope. We get to look across not only at structural change, because there's a lot of ways to solve problems. Organizational structure is one of them. Often it's not even the most powerful tool. Powerful tools exist kind of across the spectrum of process improvements, communication, culture change, expectations of leadership and employees, engagement with community. There's all sorts of other things that we can focus in on the future improvements phase of this work. So we're thinking about what that's exactly going to look like in terms of how it's going to exist over the next 18 months, and then how it's going to exist sort of in perpetuity as an opportunity for the city to be in closer communication and contact with community about what the needs are and ways that we can improve our services. Obviously, we have relationships with community from bureaus, from City Hall, that we have lots of touch points with community. So trying to incorporate what we know already, what we've learned with the, we hear sometimes that if you ask people again and again to weigh in on something, then they're going to say, hey, I already told you that. So we want to make sure that we're taking into account what we've already heard, but then also giving opportunities for people to weigh in specifically on where are the pain points, where are the things that we can do better. So I think if we ask this room right now, which I know is not the point of this conversation, but trust me, there will be conversations like this in the future. I'm sure we could come up with plenty of areas for improvement right now. So we will have those opportunities, those conversations with community and also with our employees, with our current leadership about things that are structural, but also things that aren't. And those things that aren't, that's a long list. So hopefully that's helpful. It's still coming into focus. We're hoping to work with some of our internal and community partners to kind of figure out what that exactly is going to look like. But I personally am pretty excited for it.
Great, thank you. This next question gets a little bit more into the weeds. When we talk about future improvements, when we talk about some of this other work, how much consolidation, do we have any idea around how much consolidation that we expect in order to achieve a more effective city administrator system?
It's a great question. Becky mentioned that it's challenging for us in one fiscal cycle to be able to kind of go down to almost the employee or team level and look at different alignments across the whole city. But believe me, there are opportunities for that. We have, by way of example, we have natural resource and environmental programs in multiple bureaus across the city. And one might hypothesize that you could pull a number of those programs out of the current homes and within different bureaus and align them in a natural resources and environment department. And you might be able to be more focused in the way you focus your human and capital resources. You may be able to prioritize better about what are the biggest problems for us to be working on. You might be able to be more responsive to regulatory mandates that come down from DEQ and EPA regarding the city's environmental responsibilities. So that's just one example of how one might be able to think about a total realignment of multiple programs in multiple places. The question for us at this moment in time is, can we pull off something with that level of complexity from a systems perspective? I mentioned earlier our HR systems, our budget systems, our accounting systems would need to be realigned so that you could actually operate that new thing, natural resource and environment department. And the question for us at this moment in time is, could we pull that off in one cycle? And those are the kinds of questions that we'll be asking ourselves about. Is that something we could do well on a short-term turnaround and do it in one fiscal year and be able to actually pull it off? And if we can do that, there may very well be examples of how we try to do that.
Thank you, Mike. So you've gotten a couple of questions around the difference between a city administrator, which we have in our code and charter, and their roles and responsibilities are outlined there, and the difference between a city administrator and a city manager, which we do not have in our charter and code.
Sure.
And this might be putting folks on the spot because we do not have our form of government experts on our call tonight. Can anyone elaborate a little bit about what that difference is? Or I can go back to the slide that had a city manager reporting structure, if that's helpful.
Yeah, really, the city manager, city administrator terms are terms of art in public management. And I'm most familiar with Oregon. And if you look across Oregon, you'll see that terminology in different cities. And what normally is the difference is that in a council manager form of government, where you have a city manager, where all employees report to that city manager, and the manager then reports to a council. When you have that, the term of art is almost always city manager. I used to be the city administrator in a small town in Oregon. And the difference, as I experienced it, was that as cities have evolved and have changed their forms, city councils and the voters through their charter amendments have retained some of the appointing and removal authority for some positions within city government with the council. And so, or in our case, with the mayor. So the mayor has appointing and removal authority for the chief of police, for instance. You wouldn't see that in a council manager form of government. But in the example I was giving about my past, I was the city administrator in Canby, and the charter gave the council hire and fire authority over the chief of police and a couple of city officers. They had still had a city treasurer and a city recorder. And while on a day-to-day basis, I directed their work, the council kept hire and fire authority for those city officers. So that's the basic difference between a city manager and a city administrator. They really are terms of art in public management.
Thank you, Mike. I want to thank everyone for putting their questions in today. Those are all the questions that we have. We've either answered them live or we've answered them in the chat. I just want to thank everyone for your questions. I'm going to pass it back to Jennifer to wrap it up and let us know where, if we have more questions, where we can send those.
Yes, thank you everyone for your great questions. And we noted that there's much curiosity and questions related to how people can engage, how people can stay informed with this process. And so we want to thank you for attending this session and want to share moving forward how you can stay involved. One is definitely continue to use and send this resource, this email for our transition team to send your comments and thoughts and ongoing questions that may come up after tonight. And also upcoming, we have a listening session planned for August 8th from 6 to 8 p.m. It will be a virtual session, and it's an opportunity for community members to come and learn about the current planning that is underway to set up our leadership for success in 2025. It will really focus on updates for city council organization and procedures. And we are we'll be sending up that link and updating it on our website, and can make it available to folks in this group as well moving forward. And then, as we shared earlier, please stay tuned to Portland City Council agendas. As we mentioned, the recommendation will be sent to City Council in sometime in October, estimated mid-October. And there will be opportunity for the public to comment during that time as the City Council considers and discusses that recommendation. So we put a link here to the Portland City Council agendas, and you can stay updated in that way. And so we want to just thank you. Mike, did you have some additional words to share?
The Q&A that Marianne Fitzgerald is noting that we haven't answered her questions, and I didn't see the questions. Maybe someone else did in the
There was
Q&A.
There was a question about city budgets having performance measures, although some are more meaningful than others. And the question was, I think it was, we had a misunderstanding of the question. She says, why wait until the future improvements phase to begin conversations about meaningful performance measures to measure progress towards goals and outcomes? Why not begin that dialogue during fiscal year 24-25 budget process? So I was typing an answer, but I'd love you to weigh in on that.
Oh, sure.
And thank you, Marianne, and thank you for pointing that out. And we apologize for the oversight.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. It's been a while since we've seen each other. Nice to see you involved here. The city budget does have performance metrics in it now. They're called key performance indicators, KPIs, and they have been used for a number of years. I do know that the city budget office is looking at enhanced performance metrics, and we are having a lot of discussion in this transition project about having a group in the city organization that will be both working with bureaus to have better performance metrics and have a point in our budget process where those metrics are explicitly discussed, and we work with council and the mayor to actually make adjustments in our strategies based on the performance metrics, and ultimately, hopefully, making adjustments in our investments in future budgets. So it's a great question. We currently have them and they are in the budget, but I think we can do better regarding how they are actually incorporated into our decision-making as we move forward. So thanks for the question, Mary Ann. It's a good one.
Great, thank you for that. And with that, we just want to thank you for attending and engaging and learning more about this process. We look forward to keeping you updated in the weeks and months ahead. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.